My mother looked me dead in the eye through the screen of my iPhone and told me my skin was too dark to be in her precious wedding photos. She said I should be grateful I was spared the embarrassment of standing next to the wealthy groom. She claimed I would ruin the aesthetic. I did not argue. I did not cry. Instead, I booked a first-class ticket to Paris for the exact same weekend. But while I was sipping champagne in front of the Eiffel Tower, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a video of that same wealthy groom spitting in my mother's face. Before I tell you how I destroyed him, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been the black sheep of your family. I am Zora, 35 years old, and for the last decade, I have been the person the richest people in New York call when their lives are falling apart. My official title is Crisis Management Strategist, but in reality, I am a cleaner. I fix reputations. I bury scandals. I make the impossible problems of the elite disappear with a few phone calls and a stack of non-disclosure agreements. My office on the 42nd floor in Manhattan overlooks the city I conquered all on my own. I wear $5,000 suits not to show off but as armor. I learned early in life that if you do not look untouchable, people will try to touch you, break you, and discard you. Nobody taught me this lesson better than my own flesh and blood. It was Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of reviewing a merger contract worth $50 million. The air in my office was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to erupt on my phone screen. When the FaceTime request from my mother, Patricia, flashed across the glass surface of my desk, I hesitated. My intuition, honed by years of navigating corporate sharks, told me to ignore it. But the old habit of seeking approval is a hard addiction to break. I tapped the green button. The screen filled with the chaotic energy of a bridal suite. My mother Patricia was flushed, her face caked in makeup that was slightly too light for her complexion, a desperate attempt to look younger and perhaps less like herself. Next to her was my younger sister Ebony. At 28, Ebony was beautiful in the way a porcelain doll is beautiful. Perfect, hollow, and easily shattered. She was wearing a white silk robe and sipping a mimosa, her eyes darting around the room as if she were performing for an invisible audience. Zora, I am glad you picked up, my mother said. Her voice was high-pitched, a tone she reserved for when she was nervous or about to deliver bad news. We have been going over the guest list for the final time with Julian. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs. I assumed they were calling to ask for more money. That was the usual pattern. First came the flattery, then the guilt trip, and finally the request for a bank transfer. I had already prepared a check for $20,000. It was sitting right there on my desk next to my coffee. It was my way of buying peace. I thought if I paid for the flowers or the catering, they would let me survive the wedding weekend without insults. I was wrong. What is the issue with the guest list? I asked. My voice was calm, professional. The same voice I used when telling a CEO he was about to be indicted. Patricia glanced at Ebony, then looked back at the camera. She smoothed her hair nervously. Well, honey, this is hard to say. You know how important this wedding is for us. Julian is inviting his business partners from Wall Street. There is even a rumor that a senator might stop by. I waited. I knew the punchline was coming. Julian and his family are very particular about optics, Ebony chimed in. She examined her manicured fingernails, refusing to meet my eyes through the screen. He feels that the bridal party needs to have a certain cohesive look, a certain elegance. And you think I lack elegance, I stated. It was not a question. No, not that my mother rushed to correct me, though her eyes said otherwise. It is just that you have such a strong presence, Zora. You are so serious all the time. Your energy is very heavy. And let us be honest, you have put on weight since Christmas. The dress samples we ordered simply do not flatter your figure. We do not want you to feel uncomfortable standing next to the other girls who are all size 2. I looked down at my body. I was a size 8. I ran marathons. I was healthy. But in the twisted mirror of the Vance family, anything that was not starving was considered obese. It is more than that, Ebony said, finally looking at the camera. Her eyes were cold. Julian thinks you would stand out too much. He says your skin tone is significantly darker than everyone else in the family. He is worried it will throw off the lighting balance in the professional photos. He wants a soft pastel aesthetic. You are just too dark, Zora. It clashes with the theme. The silence that filled my office was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. I could hear the distant wail of a siren 40 stories down. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and the sister I had protected from bullies on the playground. They were looking back at me not with love, but with critical assessment. To them, I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a prop that did not fit the set design. Julian says he is allergic to ugly people. Ebony laughed, covering her mouth as if it were a cute inside joke. He was joking, obviously, but he really is strict about the guest list. So we thought it would be better if you just stayed home. You can send a gift, of course. We will tell everyone you were too busy with work. That is believable, right? You are always working. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Yes, that is perfect. It protects your dignity, Zora. We are doing this for you. We do not want people whispering about why the bride's sister looks like the help. The help. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt a familiar burning sensation in my chest, the ghost of 1,000 childhood slights. I remembered being 10 years old, and my mother scrubbing my knees with lemon juice, praying I would lighten up. I remembered Ebony getting the modeling classes while I got the tutoring sessions, because I was the smart one, not the pretty one. I looked at the check on my desk. $20,000. It was signed in blue ink. It was enough to pay off my mother's credit card debt. It was enough to send Ebony on a honeymoon. I picked it up. The paper felt crisp between my fingers. Zora. Are you there? My mother asked, her voice tinged with impatience. We really need to go. Julian is waiting for us to approve the floral arrangements. I am here, I said. My voice did not shake. I did not raise my volume. I channeled the ice-cold demeanor that made grown men tremble in boardrooms. I appreciate you telling me this directly. It clarifies everything. So you understand, Ebony said, looking relieved. You are not mad. I picked up the check and held it up to the camera lens so they could see the amount. I saw my mother's eyes widen. She recognized the bank logo. She recognized the zero after zero. Is that for us? Patricia asked, her greed momentarily overriding her cruelty. It was, I said. I was going to mail this today to cover the catering costs you were worried about last week. Oh, Zora. That is so generous. My mother started, a smile breaking across her face. We can still use it. You can just mail it. Just because you are not attending does not mean you cannot support your sister. I looked at her smile. It was the smile of a predator sensing weakness. Slowly, deliberately, I ripped the check in half. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet office. My mother gasped. Ebony's mouth fell open. What are you doing? My mother shrieked. I put the two halves together and ripped them again. Then again. Until the $20,000 was nothing but blue and white confetti in my palm. I am removing the clutter, I said. Since I do not fit the aesthetic, my money should not fit either. I would hate for my dark, heavy dollars to ruin the pastel theme of your bank account. Zora! You ungrateful brat! My mother screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. Julian is a wealthy man. We do not need your charity. We were trying to be nice to you. Julian is a con artist who has convinced you that you are royalty, I said, dropping the paper scraps into the metal trash can beneath my desk. And you are so desperate to be accepted by him that you would throw your own child away. Have a lovely wedding. Do not call me when the bill comes due. I ended the call before they could utter another word. The screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection. I did not look like the help. I looked like a queen who had just executed a traitor. My hand was steady as I reached for the office phone. I pressed the speed dial for my executive assistant, David. He picked up on the first ring. Yes, Zora, what do you need? Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week, I said, And David, book me a flight to Paris. Tonight. First class. I want the suite at the Ritz, the one overlooking the square. Is everything okay? David asked, sensing the edge in my voice. Everything is perfect, I replied. I just saved $20,000. I think I deserve a vacation. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. New York City lay spread out beneath me, a grid of lights and concrete. Somewhere out there, my mother and sister were probably scrambling to explain why they had lost their safety net. They thought they had discarded me. They thought they had cut off a dead limb. They had no idea they had just severed their own lifeline. I watched the traffic below moving like blood through the veins of the city. I felt a strange sense of lightness. For 35 years, I had carried the weight of their expectations, their insults, and their financial incompetence. Today I had put it down. I was not going to their wedding. I was going to Paris. I was going to drink vintage wine and eat cheese, and forget that the name Vance ever meant anything to me. But as I stood there watching the sun dip below the Hudson River, I did not know that fate had a different itinerary planned. I did not know that while I was in the air crossing the Atlantic, the perfect facade of Julian Sterling was going to crack wide open. I did not know that the man who was allergic to ugly people was about to show the world just how ugly he really was. I turned back to my desk, gathered my purse, and walked out of the office. I did not look back at the confetti in the trash can. The trash had taken itself out. If you are enjoying this story so far, please tap the like button. It helps more people find this channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever cut off a family member for your own mental peace? The flight to Paris was smooth. The champagne was cold. For 7 hours I was unreachable. No emails, no texts, no FaceTime calls from weeping mothers. I slept better than I had in years. When the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, I felt reborn. I turned on my phone expecting a barrage of angry texts from Patricia. Instead, my phone froze. It buzzed continuously, a solid vibration in my hand that lasted for a full minute. Hundreds of notifications, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, texts from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months, and a string of frantic messages from Ebony. Zora, please pick up. He left. Mom is in the hospital. The police are here. Please, Zora, we need you. I stood in the immigration line surrounded by weary travelers and frowned. I opened Twitter. I didn't have to search for it. It was the #1 trending topic in the United States. The hashtag was wedding fail. I clicked on the first video. It had 3 million views. The thumbnail showed a chaotic scene in a hotel lobby. I recognized the floral arrangements. I recognized the dress my mother was wearing. And I recognized Julian. But he didn't look like the polished gentleman from the photos. He looked feral. I pressed play. And then right there in the middle of the Paris airport, my jaw dropped. I watched as the man my family worshipped, the man they discarded me for, leaned forward and spat a thick glob of saliva directly into my mother's face. The game had changed. I was no longer just a disinvited guest. I was the only person on earth who could clean up this mess. Or if I chose the person who could burn it all to the ground. The ride to my parents' house in Westchester was a blur of gray highway and expensive cars. I sat in the back of the Uber, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the raindrops race each other down the window. I had told myself I would never go back there. I had built a fortress of a life in Manhattan specifically to keep the toxicity of my childhood at bay. But practicalities have a way of forcing your hand. My passport was still in the wall safe behind the painting in my old bedroom, a relic from the last family vacation I was invited to 5 years ago. I needed it for Paris. I needed it to escape. As the car turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, my stomach tightened. It was a physical reaction, a muscle memory of anxiety that 35 years of life had not erased. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling colonial structure that my mother insisted on painting a pristine, blinding white. It was meant to look like old money. It was meant to signal that the Vance family had arrived. But as we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the cracks in the facade. The landscaping was overgrown. The paint on the shutters was peeling, and there was a man in a cheap suit taping a notice to the front door. I thanked the driver and stepped out into the humid afternoon air. My heels clicked rhythmically on the pavement as I approached the house. The man in the suit turned startled. He looked at my tailored blazer, my stern expression, and the way I carried myself. He assumed I was the homeowner. "I am just the appraiser," he said, quickly holding up a clipboard as if it were a shield. "The bank sent me for the secondary valuation." I tried to ring the bell, but no one answered. I looked at the paper he had just taped to the mahogany door. It was a pre-foreclosure notice. My heart did not race. It stopped cold. This was not just bad financial management. This was catastrophic. "I will handle this," I said, peeling the tape off the wood. The man nodded and hurried to his sedan, eager to escape the tension radiating off me. I unlocked the front door with my key, the metal feeling cold and heavy in my hand. The foyer was dim. The crystal chandelier, usually blazing with light to impress neighbors, was dark. "Hello," I called out. My father Otis appeared from the living room. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped and he was wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. When he saw me, he did not smile. He looked terrified. "Zora," he whispered, glancing toward the kitchen. "We did not expect you. Your mother said you were working." I held up the bank notice. "I was working until I found out the bank is about to seize the house." "What is this, Dad?" Otis flinched. He walked over and snatched the paper from my hand, crumpling it into his pocket. "It is nothing. Just a mix-up, a clerical error." "Do not lie to me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I recognize the bank logo. I know what a secondary valuation means. You are refinancing. Again. But you already have 2 mortgages on this place. No bank would give you a third unless you put up something reckless as collateral." He rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of exhaustion that made him look 10 years older. "It is for the wedding, Zora. We had to. Julian insisted that the reception be at the plaza. He said his family expects a certain standard." "And Julian is paying for it, right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My father looked at the floor. "His assets are tied up. It is complicated. International banking laws." He explained it to us. "He just needs us to front the cash for the vendors. He is going to pay us back double once his trust fund clears next month." He promised Zora. "He is going to buy us a villa in the Hamptons." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. A villa in the Hamptons. "Dad, are you listening to yourself? You mortgaged the house for $300,000 because a man you have known for 6 months told you his money is stuck in Switzerland. That is the oldest con in the book. He loves Ebony," my father insisted, his voice rising weakly. "He wants to take care of us. You just do not understand how these high-net-worth individuals operate." "I deal with high-net-worth individuals every single day," I snapped. "And do you know what they never do? They never ask their retired middle-class in-laws to mortgage their home to pay for a party." Before my father could respond, the kitchen door swung open. My mother Patricia marched out. She was wearing an apron over a designer dress that still had the tag tucked inside the collar. She looked at me with pure disdain. "I heard your voice," she said. "I thought I told you not to come here. You are upsetting your father." "I am trying to save him from homelessness," I countered. "Mom, look at this house. You are drowning. You just took out a predatory loan to impress a man who spits on waitresses." Patricia crossed her arms. Her eyes narrowed. "This is exactly why you were not invited. You are jealous. You have always been jealous of Ebony. Because she found a man who adores her, a man with lineage, a man with blue eyes and a trust fund. And you are 35 alone and bitter. I am 35 debt-free, and the only reason this family has not been on the street years ago," I said. "Where is the money, Mom? Did you already transfer it?" "It is none of your business," she hissed. "It is an investment in your sister's future. When Julian gets his inheritance, we will be set for life. He is going to elevate this family. He is going to wash away the struggle." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind the makeup. She hated being black. She hated the struggle of her ancestors. She wanted so badly to be adjacent to whiteness, to power, that she was willing to sell the roof over her head for a taste of it. She saw Julian not as a person, but as a bleach for her bloodline. "He is scamming you," I said clearly. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing at the door. "Get your things and get out! You are poison Zora!" I shook my head. I walked past her up the stairs to my old room. The house smelled of dust, an expensive perfume, a masking scent for the rot underneath. In my room, nothing had changed. The bed was made. My high school trophies were still on the shelf gathering dust. I opened the safe behind the painting of a ship at sea. My passport was there. I grabbed it along with a few savings bonds my grandmother had left me. I was cutting the last ties. As I walked back down the stairs, the front door opened again. A man walked in. It was Julian. He was wearing a linen suit that cost more than my father's car. He had the kind of confident, sweeping walk that takes up space, assuming everyone else will move. He was handsome in a generic way, with sandy hair and a jawline that suggested he had never been told no. But his eyes were empty. They were the eyes of a shark swimming through a tank of guppies. He stopped when he saw me on the stairs. He did not know who I was. He had never bothered to meet the sister who worked too much. To him, I was just a black woman in a house he considered his property. "Oh, good," he said, his voice dripping with casual entitlement. "The help is finally here." I froze on the bottom step. My mother and father stood in the hallway, frozen in terror. They knew who I was. They knew what I was capable of. But neither of them spoke. Neither of them corrected him. They were too afraid of offending the golden goose. Julian looked at me, looking me up and down with a sneer. "I have some boxes in the trunk of the Maserati outside. Grab them and put them in the garage. And be careful, they are fragile." My hand tightened around my phone in my pocket. I slipped my thumb over the side button, triggering the voice memo shortcut I had programmed for emergencies. The recording started. "Excuse me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You heard me," he said, checking his watch. "The garage, and when you are done, ask Patricia for a bucket. The Maserati has some mud on the tires. I want it detailed before the rehearsal dinner." My mother stepped forward, her face pale. "Julian, honey, this is—" Julian held up a hand to silence her. "Not now, Patricia. I am on a schedule." He looked back at me. "Well, what are you waiting for? Do you need me to speak slower?" I looked at my parents. My father was looking at his shoes. My mother was pleading with me with her eyes, begging me to play along, begging me not to ruin the fantasy. They were willing to let this man treat their eldest daughter like a servant in her own childhood home, just to keep the check from bouncing. I smiled. It was the smile I used right before I destroyed a hostile witness in a deposition. "No," I said. "I understand you perfectly." I walked past him. I did not head to the garage. I headed to the front door. As I passed him, I looked him dead in the eye. "You have a little something on your collar," I whispered. He flinched, reaching for his neck. By the time he realized there was nothing there, I was already out the door. "Where are you going?" he shouted after me. "The car is not going to wash itself." I kept walking. I walked past his rented Maserati. I noticed the rental agency sticker on the bumper that he had tried to peel off but failed. I walked down the driveway, past the overgrown hedges, past the foreclosure notice that my father had crumpled but not destroyed. I did not call an Uber. I walked 3 blocks to the train station, letting the rain soak my blazer. I had the recording. I had the confirmation. And I had my passport. My family had chosen their savior. They had mortgaged their past and their future for a man who saw them as nothing more than stepping stones. They wanted to be blind. They wanted to believe the lie. As I sat on the train heading back to the city, listening to the recording of his voice, calling me the help over and over again, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was not the help. I was the executioner. And the trial was about to begin. They wanted a show. They wanted a spectacle. I would give them one. But it would not be the wedding they dreamed of. It would be a funeral for their vanity. I looked at my phone. The recording was 2 minutes long. It captured everything. His arrogance, my parents' silence, the sound of my own footsteps walking away. I uploaded it to my encrypted cloud server. Then I opened my banking app. I transferred the last remaining funds from the joint emergency account I shared with my father, the account I had been filling for 10 years to pay for their health care, into my personal holding company. If Julian was going to save them, let him pay for their heart medication. Let him pay for the electricity. Let him pay for the roof that was about to be foreclosed on. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold window of the train. Next stop, Paris. And after that, war. Paris was breathing beneath my balcony at the Ritz. The city lights shimmered against the night sky, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt I had left behind across the Atlantic. I sat wrapped in a plush white robe that smelled of lavender and old money, a crystal glass of 1982 Bordeaux resting in my hand. This was what real wealth felt like. It was quiet. It was private. It did not need to scream to be heard. I closed my eyes and took a sip of the wine, letting the velvet texture coat my tongue. For the first time in years, the knot of anxiety that lived permanently in my chest had loosened. There was no mother critiquing my hair. There was no sister making backhanded compliments about my weight. There was just the cool French air, and the knowledge that I was entirely self-made. My family was currently in New York, likely in the middle of what they believed was the social event of the season. I imagined them at the Plaza Hotel. My mother would be preening in her mother of the bride dress, smiling too wide, trying too hard to impress people who would never see her as an equal. Ebony would be posing for photos, convinced she had secured the bag, unaware that the bag was empty and riddled with holes. I felt a twinge of pity, but I stamped it out immediately. They had made their choice. They had chosen the illusion of Julian Sterling over the reality of their own daughter. I reached for a macaron on the silver tray beside me, intending to enjoy the silence for a few hours longer before sleep took me. But silence in my life has always been the calm before the storm. My phone, which I had placed face down on the marble table, began to vibrate. It was not a gentle buzz. It was a violent, continuous spasm. It moved across the smooth surface of the table like a living thing in pain. I frowned. It was 3 a.m. in Paris. I had set my phone to do not disturb for everyone except my most critical business contacts. I flipped the phone over. The screen was a waterfall of notifications, but they were not from my mother. They were not from Ebony. They were from my colleagues, public relations directors from Fortune 500 companies, journalists from the New York Times, editors from gossip blogs, and my assistant, David. David had sent a single text message. It contained a link and 3 words: "Do not panic." My pulse remained steady. Panic is for amateurs. I am a professional. I set my wine glass down with a deliberate click. I picked up the phone and tapped the link. It opened to a live stream recording that had already been ripped and reposted on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The view count was climbing so fast the numbers were blurring. 2 million views, 3 million views. I pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a cell phone by a guest who was trying to be discreet but failing. I recognized the ballroom of the plaza immediately. The lighting was low, the flowers were excessive, and the air was thick with tension. The camera zoomed in on the bar area. The wedding reception was in full swing, or at least it was supposed to be. But the music had stopped. The chatter of the guests had died down to a horrified murmur. In the center of the frame stood Julian. He did not look like the dashing groom my sister had posted about for months. His bow tie was undone. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. His skin was flushed a deep, ugly crimson that clashed with his expensive suit. He was screaming at the bartender, but then the camera panned to reveal who he was really screaming at. My mother. Patricia stood there, clutching her beaded clutch bag with both hands, her knuckles white. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of sheer terror. Beside her stood the hotel manager, a man with a tablet in his hand and a look of polite firmness on his face. "Run it again," Julian roared, his voice cracking. "Run the damn card again." "I am sorry, sir," the manager said, his voice audible even over the distance. "We have attempted the transaction 3 times. The card has been declined. The catering deposit for the open bar was not processed. We cannot serve any more alcohol until the balance of $40,000 is settled." The camera shook as the person filming shifted to get a better angle. The crowd gasped. $40,000. My mother had maxed out every card she had just to pay for the flowers and the venue rental. She had nothing left. I knew this. She knew this. But Julian apparently did not know this. Julian turned on my mother. He loomed over her, his height suddenly menacing rather than protective. "You told me you handled this," he shouted. "You told me the finances were liquid. You said you wanted to contribute to the wedding to show your appreciation for me joining this family." Patricia's voice was a tremble, a pathetic sound that the microphone barely picked up. "Julian, honey, please. It must be a bank error. Just use your card for tonight. You know I will pay you back. As soon as the refinancing goes through on the house, I will have the cash. Just cover it for tonight." People are staring. The mention of the house seemed to trigger something feral in him. Julian stepped closer to her. He invaded her personal space in a way that made my own skin crawl thousands of miles away. "My card," he laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You want me to pay for your party? You people are all the same. Mooching off me from day one. And where is this refinancing you keep talking about? Where is the deed, Patricia? You promised me the deed to the house as a wedding gift. You said it would be signed over by tonight." My mother reached out, touching his sleeve with a shaking hand. "Not here, Julian. Please. We can talk about this later. Just pay the tab. Do not embarrass us." That was the wrong thing to say. Julian yanked his arm away as if her touch burned him. The violence of the movement made my mother stumble back in her heels. The room went deadly silent. Even the person filming seemed to hold their breath. "Embarrass you," Julian screamed. "You are the embarrassment. Look at you. Standing here in a dress you cannot afford, begging me for money like a beggar on the street." And then he did the unthinkable. On the screen in high definition, I watched as Julian Sterling, the man my family thought was their savior, gathered saliva in his mouth. He leaned forward. He looked directly into my mother's eyes, and he spat. A thick white glob of spit landed squarely on my mother's cheek, just below her eye. It slowly began to slide down her expertly applied foundation. The collective gasp from the wedding guests sounded like all the oxygen being sucked out of the room. My mother stood frozen. She did not wipe it off. She was in shock. Her brain could not process that the white savior she had worshipped had just desecrated her. But Julian was not done. He pointed a finger in her face, his eyes bulging. "You lying old hag," he bellowed. "You tricked me. You said you had assets. You said you had property. You are nothing but a fraud. I am not marrying into this trash." He looked around the room, his eyes wild, and then he looked back at my mother. And then he said the words that would end his life as he knew it. "You thought you could trap me, you filthy black monkey." The slur hung in the air. It was sharper than the spit. It was heavier than the silence. It was the truth finally stripped of its polite disguise. He did not love Ebony. He did not respect my parents. He saw them as animals. He saw them as something to be used and discarded. Ebony, who had been standing off to the side sobbing, let out a wail that sounded like an animal in a trap. She lunged at him, her fingernails aiming for his face, but the video cut off abruptly as chaos erupted. The screen went black. The play button reappeared. I sat in the silence of my Paris hotel room. I did not gasp. I did not cover my mouth in horror. My heart rate did not even spike. Instead, a cold, icy calm settled over me. It was the same calm I felt when I walked into a courtroom, knowing I had the smoking gun evidence in my briefcase. I picked up my wine glass and finished the Bordeaux in one smooth swallow. The taste was still excellent, perhaps even better now. I set the empty glass down on the tray. I looked at the black screen of my phone. My mother had been humiliated. My sister had been destroyed. My family name was currently being dragged through the mud by millions of strangers online. They were a laughingstock. They were the punchline of a cruel joke. But amidst the wreckage, I saw something else. I saw an opening. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room, illuminating my face. I did not go to social media to post a reaction. I did not call my mother to comfort her. I went straight to my encrypted server. I opened the terminal. I typed in a name, Julian Sterling. I had run a preliminary background check on him months ago, which had come up clean. Too clean. But now I had more data points. I had a video. I had a location. I had a behavioral profile. A man who explodes like that over a declined credit card is not a billionaire with trust fund issues. He is a man who is broke. He is a man who is cornered. And a man who uses racial slurs so easily has done it before. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I accessed the facial recognition software my firm licensed from a private security contractor. I took a screenshot of Julian's face from the video, specifically the moment his mask slipped, and he looked like a demon. I uploaded it. Search, I whispered to the empty room. The progress bar moved across the screen. I poured myself another glass of wine. My vacation was over. The sightseeing was cancelled. I had a new itinerary. I was going to peel back every layer of Julian Sterling's life until I found the rot at the core. And then, I was going to make him wish he had never learned to speak. My family had told me I was too dark, too heavy, too serious for their picture-perfect life. They were right, I was heavy. I was the anchor they threw away, not realizing I was the only thing that could have held them steady in a storm. Now the storm was here, and I was the only one who knew how to navigate the waves. The computer beeped. A match found. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. "Hello, Julian," I said softly, or should I say Kyle. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant. He answered on the first ring despite the hour. "David," I said, "get the jet ready. We are going back to New York." And David, call the legal department. I want them to draft a power of attorney agreement. A comprehensive one. For whom, Zora? David asked. For my mother, I said. She is going to need representation, and she is going to pay for it with the only thing she has left, her pride. I closed the laptop. The game had officially begun. The chaos that erupted at the Plaza Hotel was not just a wedding gone wrong, it was a social nuclear explosion. While I was coordinating with my legal team from a quiet suite in Paris, the situation in New York had devolved into anarchy. According to the police reports I would later review, Julian did not just leave, he scorched the earth. After delivering his racial slur, he signaled to his groomsmen, and they marched out of the ballroom in a phalanx of expensive tuxedos, leaving my family amidst the ruins of their social climbing dreams. He did not look back, not even when my sister screamed his name. Ebony did not handle the rejection with grace. She had spent her entire adult life curating an image of perfection, and when that image shattered, she shattered with it. Witnesses stated that she grabbed a magnum of champagne and hurled it at the retreating groom. She missed Julian, but she hit a waiter, sending shards of glass and expensive vintage bubbling across the marble floor. Then she turned her rage on the venue itself. She tore down the floral archway that had cost $5,000. She overturned the cake table, sending 5 tiers of white fondant crashing into the carpet. When the hotel security tried to restrain her, she bit one of them on the arm. By the time the NYPD arrived, the bride was not a victim, she was a liability. The footage of Ebony being led out of the plaza in handcuffs, her white dress stained with wine and cake, screaming obscenities at the paparazzi, flashed across every news network in the country. She was no longer the golden child, she was the mad woman in the bridal gown. My phone rang again an hour later. It was a number I recognized, but the voice on the other end was unrecognizable. My mother Patricia was a woman who prided herself on composure, on never letting a hair fall out of place. But the woman sobbing into the receiver sounded broken. "Zora, please," she wailed. "You have to help us. They took her. They took my baby." I sat at the desk in my hotel room, my posture rigid. I did not offer comfort. I did not ask, "Are you okay?" I went straight to business. "Where are you, Patricia?" "I am at the precinct in Midtown," she sobbed. "They will not let me see her. They are charging her with assault and destruction of property and disorderly conduct. The press is outside. There are so many cameras, Zora. I cannot leave. I cannot go out there. They are calling us trash. Julian told them we scammed him." I closed my eyes for a brief second, inhaling the scent of the fresh lilies on my desk. This was the moment. This was the shift. For 35 years I had been the invisible daughter, the one kept in the shadows because I did not fit the aesthetic. Now the spotlight was burning them alive and they were begging for my shadow to cover them. "I can fix this," I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a surgeon preparing to cut. "Oh, thank God," Patricia cried. "Thank God. Please, Zora, come home. Pay the bail. Tell them who you are. Tell them to let your sister go." I did not move. I let the silence stretch over the Atlantic Ocean until my mother stopped crying and started listening. "I will come home," I said, "and I will get Ebony out. I will make the press back down. But I have conditions." "Anything," Patricia stammered. "Anything, Zora, just come." "I am not coming as your daughter," I continued, my voice hard as diamond. "I am coming as your legal counsel. I am coming as a crisis manager. And before I step foot on a plane, you are going to sign a document my assistant is emailing to you right now." "What document?" she asked, confusion creeping into her panic. "A general power of attorney," I said. "It gives me full legal authority to act on behalf of you and Ebony. It gives me control over your finances, your assets, and your public statements. You do not speak to the press. You do not speak to the police. You do not speak to Julian. You do not even breathe without my permission. If you want me to save you from this nightmare, you have to hand me the wheel. Completely." There was a pause. I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking about control. She was thinking about how much she hated needing me. But then she looked around the cold police station. She looked at the sharks waiting outside and she realized she had no choice. "I will sign it," she whispered. "Just come home." I hung up the phone. I did not say I love you. I did not say goodbye. I simply packed my laptop and walked out of the Ritz. The flight back to New York was spent reviewing the case file my team had assembled. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac at JFK, I had a strategy. I knew which journalists to threaten with libel suits and which ones to feed exclusive scoops to. I knew the judge who would be presiding over Ebony's arraignment. I knew the exact dollar amount of the damage to the plaza. When I stepped off the plane, I did not look like a woman who had just crossed an ocean. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my mother's wedding dress. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun. My sunglasses were dark. As I walked through the arrivals terminal, I could see the flashbulbs popping from a distance. The press had found out I was coming. They knew Zora Vance was the fixer. They wanted a comment. They wanted a reaction. A swarm of reporters surged forward as I exited the secure area. Microphones were thrust in my face. Questions were shouted over one another, creating a wall of noise. "Ms. Vance, is it true your sister attacked the groom? Ms. Vance, is your family bankrupt? What do you have to say about the racial slurs used by Julian Sterling? Is your mother really a scammer?" I did not flinch. I did not stop walking. My security detail, a team of 3 large men I hired on retainer, cleared a path for me. But just before I reached the waiting SUV, I stopped. I turned to the cameras. I took off my sunglasses. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera, the one broadcasting live to CNN. My family is currently the victim of a calculated fraud perpetrated by a man using a false identity, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and projected perfectly over the noise. The actions of my sister were the result of extreme emotional distress caused by a hate crime. We will be cooperating fully with the authorities to clear her name. And regarding Mr. Sterling, or whatever his real name is, I would advise him to find a very good lawyer. Because I am home now. I put my sunglasses back on and ducked into the car. The door slammed shut, sealing out the noise. I leaned back against the leather seat and checked my phone. The digital signature on the power of attorney document had just come through. My mother belonged to me now. My sister belonged to me now. They had spent their lives trying to mold me into something acceptable. Now, I was going to mold them into something survivable. "Driver," I said, looking at the rain streaking the window. "Take me to the 19th precinct. It is time to collect the bride." The silence in the limousine on the way from the precinct to my office was thick enough to choke on. My mother sat in the corner clutching her purse as if it contained the remnants of her dignity. Ebony sat next to her, staring out the tinted window, her mascara streaked across her cheeks like war paint from a losing battle. They did not speak to me. They did not thank me. They were too busy processing the shift in the universe. For 30 years they had been the queens of their little suburban kingdom, and I was the peasant they tolerated. Now they were refugees in my world. When the elevator doors pinged open on the 42nd floor of the Vance and Partners building in Midtown Manhattan, my mother gasped. She stepped out onto the marble floor of the reception area, her eyes widening as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River. The office was a study in intimidation. Minimalist furniture, modern art that cost more than their mortgage, and a silence that commanded respect. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Sarah, stood up immediately. "Good morning, Ms. Vance. I have the forensic accountant on line 1 and the private investigator in the conference room. Shall I hold your calls?" "Yes, Sarah, thank you. Send the files to my tablet and bring us 3 waters. No ice." I walked past the reception desk without stopping, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished stone. I could hear my mother and sister shuffling behind me, their footsteps hesitant. They had never been here. They had never asked to see where I worked. In their minds, I pushed papers in a cubicle. They had no idea I owned the building. I opened the double doors to my private office and gestured for them to sit. They collapsed into the leather chairs opposite my desk, looking small and out of place. I did not sit. I stood by the window looking out at the city that I had conquered while they were busy planning a wedding that never happened. "You have a nice view," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling. "It is a view that cost me 15 years of 80-hour work weeks," I said, turning to face them. I did not offer them comfort. We were past that. We were in the autopsy phase of this disaster. I picked up a velvet tray from my desk and slid it toward Ebony. On it lay a jeweler's loupe and a pair of tweezers. "Give me the ring." "Ebony," I said. Ebony looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She clutched her left hand to her chest protectively. "Why? It is the only thing I have left of him. He loves me, Zora. You do not understand. He was stressed, he snapped. But this ring proves he values me. It is 5 carats. It is flawless." I held out my hand. My palm was steady. "Give me the ring." She hesitated, looking at our mother for support. Patricia nodded slowly, defeated. Ebony slid the massive diamond off her finger and placed it in my hand. It felt heavy, but not in the way gold should. It felt heavy with lies. I placed it on the desk and picked up a sheet of paper that had been waiting for me. I did not need to look at the ring myself. I had already had my specialist examine it from the high-resolution photos Ebony had posted on Instagram weeks ago. I pushed the paper toward her. "Read it." Ebony picked up the report. Her eyes scanned the technical jargon, confusion clouding her face. "I do not understand. What is refractive index?" "It means it is glass." "Ebony," I said brutally, It is not a diamond. It is not even high-quality cubic zirconia. It is industrial-grade glass cut to sparkle under store lights. I sent the photos to the head gemologist at Tiffany's this morning. The setting is brass-painted gold. The stone is worth $15 a dozen. Ebony dropped the paper as if it were on fire. No, no, that is impossible. We went to the jeweler together. I saw him pay for it. You saw him hand a credit card to a man in a back room, I corrected her. A man who was likely his accomplice. You saw a performance. You did not see a transaction. He wouldn't do that. Ebony wailed, the denial frantic in her voice. He told me I was his queen. He said nothing was too good for me. Maybe he was scammed too. Maybe the jeweler tricked him. I walked around the desk and leaned against the edge, looking down at them. You still do not get it. You are trying to find logic in the actions of a predator. You think he is a rich man who made a mistake. You think he is a prince who lost his temper. I picked up a remote control and pointed it at the wall. The privacy glass turned opaque, and a large monitor descended from the ceiling. Let me introduce you to the man who spat in our mother's face, I said. The screen flickered to life. A mugshot appeared. It was Julian, but he looked younger, rougher. His hair was unkempt, and he was wearing an orange jumpsuit. The name under the photo did not read Julian Sterling. His name is Kyle Miller, I said. He is not from a wealthy dynasty in the Hamptons. He is from a trailer park outside of Dayton, Ohio. My mother made a choking sound, covering her mouth with her hand. I continued, my voice clinical and cold. Kyle Miller has a long and colorful history. He started with petty theft in his 20s. Then he graduated to check fraud. But 5 years ago, he found his true calling. Romance scams targeting upwardly mobile Black families. I clicked the remote. A series of photos appeared on the screen. 3 different women. All middle-aged, all well-dressed, all looking devastated. He targets families like ours, I explained. Families who have a little bit of money but a lot of insecurity. Families who are desperate for validation. He plays on your desire to be accepted by the white elite. He knows that if he presents himself as a wealthy heir, you will ignore the red flags. You will ignore the fact that his funds are always tied up. You will ignore that you never met his parents. You will ignore his microaggressions because you want the proximity to his power. My mother looked away, shame burning her cheeks. I knew I had hit the nerve. But how did you find him? Ebony whispered, staring at the face of the man she loved. I walked over to the sidebar and poured myself a glass of water. Do you remember when I came to the house to get my passport? Do you remember when Julian asked me to wash his car? Ebony nodded. He was drinking a glass of wine, I said. When I left, I did not just walk out. I took the glass with me. I wrapped it in a napkin and put it in my purse. You stole his wine glass, my mother asked, her voice incredulous. I stole his fingerprints, I replied. I have a private security team on retainer. I sent the prints to a contact at the FBI. It turns out Kyle Miller has been on their watch list for 18 months. He has outstanding warrants in Florida, Texas, and Georgia. He has stolen over $2 million from women just like you. I clicked the remote one last time. A timeline appeared. He meets the daughter. He charms the mother. He proposes quickly. He insists on a lavish wedding to create pressure. Then right before the event, he manufactures a financial emergency. He asks for a bridge loan. Or in your case, he asks you to mortgage the house. I looked at my father, who I imagined was sitting at home right now, staring at the foreclosure notice. He never intended to marry you, Ebony, I said softly. If the credit card machine had worked, if Mom had successfully paid for the reception, he would have disappeared tonight anyway. He would have vanished with the cash from the house refinance and left you at the altar. The only reason he exploded was because the money ran out before he could cash out. Ebony began to weep, a deep guttural sound of pure heartbreak. It was not pretty crying. It was the sound of a reality shattering. He called me a monkey, she sobbed. He looked at me with so much hate. He hates us, I said. He despises the very people he steals from. That is part of the game for him. It makes him feel superior. My mother stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking. She walked over to the screen and touched the face of the man who had promised her the world. "We gave him everything," she whispered. "We gave him the house. We gave him your father's pension. We gave him our dignity, and he was laughing at us the whole time." "Yes," I said, "he was." Patricia turned to me. Her eyes were hard, not with anger at me, but with a sudden terrifying clarity. The fog of her delusion had finally lifted, and what was left was a scorched earth of rage. "Where is he now?" she asked. I checked my watch. According to my investigators, he is currently at a motel in New Jersey near the airport. He is waiting for a fake passport to be delivered so he can fly to Mexico. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks we are too embarrassed, too broken, and too stupid to come after him. I walked back to my desk and picked up a thick file folder. I held it out to my mother. "This is the power of attorney you signed," I said. "And this is the plan. We are not going to call the police. Not yet." "Why not?" Ebony asked, wiping her nose. "Because if we call the police now, he goes to jail for fraud. He gets 5 years, he gets out in 2, that is not enough." I looked at the glass ring on the desk. I looked at the tears on my sister's face. I looked at the humiliation that had aged my mother 10 years in one night. "I want to destroy him," I said. "I want to take away the one thing he values more than money. His freedom to think he is smarter than us. I want to catch him in a lie so big that the entire world watches him fall." I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Sarah, send the team in." The doors opened and 4 people walked in. A forensic accountant, a former FBI negotiator, a tech specialist, and a makeup artist. My mother looked at them confused. "A makeup artist? You are going to need to look your best." "Patricia," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "Because tonight you are going to have dinner with Kyle. You are going to apologize to him. You are going to beg him to take you back. And you are going to tell him that the bank finally released the funds for the house. You want us to give him the money?" Ebony gasped. "No," I said. "I want us to give him the rope. And then I want to watch him hang himself with it." I turned to the makeup artist. "Fix their faces. They look like victims. By the time you are done, I want them to look like the bank." The room buzzed with activity as my team set up the operation. For the first time in my life, my mother and sister did not question me. They did not critique me. They sat in the chairs and let me work. They realized finally that while they were playing house, I had been building an empire. And now that empire was the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. I looked at the mugshot of Kyle Miller on the screen. He was smiling. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Kyle," I thought. Because the Vance women are coming to dinner, and we are starving. The decision to not hand Kyle Miller over to the police immediately was not a legal one, it was a personal one. If I had sent the file to the precinct captain at that moment, Kyle would have been arrested at his motel in New Jersey. He would have been charged with wire fraud and grand larceny. He would have posted bail. He might have even cut a deal. That was the sterile bureaucratic justice of the system. But what I wanted was something more visceral. I wanted the kind of justice that leaves a scar. He had not just stolen money. Money can be replaced. He had looked at my mother, a woman who had spent 60 years trying to build a fortress of respectability around herself, and he had desecrated her. He had called us animals. He had reduced my family to a racial caricature for his own amusement. Even though I had spent years distancing myself from Patricia and Ebony, they were still Vances. And nobody destroys a Vance except me. I sat at my desk looking at the burner phone I had purchased for this specific call. The office was quiet. My team was in the conference room preparing the logistics of the sting operation. I took a deep breath. I had to shed the skin of Zora the shark and put on the skin of Zora the subservient sister. I had to become the person he thought I was, the help. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. I knew he would answer. Narcissists always answer. They cannot resist the possibility that someone is calling to beg. "Hello?" His voice was guarded but arrogant. "Hi, Julian." I made my voice tremble slightly. It is Zora, Ebony's sister, the one you met on the stairs. There was a pause. I could hear the sound of a television in the background. He was relaxing. He probably thought he was in the clear. What do you want? He snapped. I told your mother we are done. I do not talk to trash. I know, I said quickly, injecting a note of desperation into my tone. I know. And I am so sorry about what happened. Mom is not thinking straight. She is old school. She did not understand how modern banking works. She thought she could just move money around later. She is devastated that she offended you. She lied to me, he spat. She tried to trap me. She was just trying to impress you, I pleaded. She knows she messed up. Look, Julian. Kyle. I stopped myself playing the part of the flustered, unintelligent sibling. I wanted to call because she is in the hospital. She had a minor heart attack after you left. Good, he said. I hope it hurts. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white, but my voice remained pathetic. She is waking up and all she does is cry about how she ruined Ebony's life. She wants to fix it. She told me to call you. She said the bank finally cleared the refinancing. The money is there. I heard the shift in his breathing. The greed had been activated. The money, he asked. How much? 300,000, I lied, plus the 50,000 she had in cash for the vendors. She signed the deed over to you this morning before the ambulance came. She said it was the only way to show you she was serious. She wants you to have the house. She wants you to come back to Ebony. I let the silence hang there. I was baiting a trap with the one thing he could not resist. Easy money. He was a grifter. He was about to leave the country with maybe 50 grand in his pocket. I was offering him a golden parachute. I do not know, he said, feigning reluctance. Your family is a lot of drama, I know, I said. But Ebony loves you, and Mom just wants to make it right. She authorized me to give you the papers. I have the deed right here. It is notarized. It is yours. You can sell the house tomorrow if you want. Just, please meet us. Let us apologize properly. Where are you? He asked. I am at my office in the city, I said. But we can meet wherever you want. Mom discharged herself against medical advice. She wants to hand it to you personally. Meet me at the vault, he said. It was a private dining club in Tribeca. Expensive. Exclusive. Of course he would pick a place like that. 7 o'clock. And bring the cash, too. If I smell a rat, I am gone. I promise, I said. Thank you, Julian. Thank you for giving us a chance. I hung up the phone. The trembling in my hand stopped instantly. I looked up at the reflection in the window. The pathetic sister was gone. The predator was back. I walked into the conference room. He took the bait, I announced. We are on for 7 at the vault. My head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ari, looked up from a blueprint of the restaurant. We have a problem, Zora. The vault is members only. They have strict privacy policies. They won't let us install cameras. I smiled. I bought the vault 3 years ago, Ari. It is part of my hospitality portfolio. I just do not put my name on the front door. Call the manager. Tell him we are closing the private wine cellar for a VIP event. I want cameras in the sconces. I want microphones in the floral centerpieces. And I want the live feed routed to a van parked in the alley. Ari grinned. Done. Next, I called Captain Henderson of the Economic Crimes Unit. We had worked together on a massive embezzlement case the year before. I had handed him the evidence that took down a corrupt hedge fund manager. He owed me a favor. Jim, I said when he answered. I have a gift for you. Zora, he said, sounding wary. Your gifts usually come with a lot of paperwork. This one comes with a confession, I said. I have Kyle Miller coming to a location I control at 7 p.m. He is going to attempt to extort my mother for a house she does not own. I am going to get him to sign a fraudulent transfer document while admitting to his previous scams on tape. It is a RICO case wrapped in a bow. Kyle Miller Henderson said his interest peaked. The wedding crasher. We have been chasing that guy across 3 states. You have him. I will have him at 7, I said. I want your team in the kitchen. Do not move until I give the signal. I want him to sign the papers. I want the crime to be completed. I want him to think he has won before you put the cuffs on. We will be there, Henderson said. I hung up. The stage was set. Now I just needed my actors. I went back to the office where my mother and sister were waiting. The makeup artist had finished. They looked tragic. My mother's eyes were shadowed to look like she hadn't slept. Ebony looked frail and broken. It was perfect. Listen to me very carefully, I told them. We are going to dinner. Julian is going to be there. You are going to do exactly what I did on the phone. You are going to beg. You are going to apologize. You are going to feed his ego until he is so full of himself he cannot see the knife coming. But I hate him, Ebony whispered. I want to scratch his eyes out. You can scratch his eyes out later, I said. Tonight you are going to tell him he is the best thing that ever happened to you. You are going to tell him you are sorry you ruined his suit. Can you do that? Ebony took a deep breath. She looked at the glass ring on the desk. Yes, I can do that. And you, I said, turning to my mother, you are going to offer him the house. You are going to tell him the deed is in this folder. I held up a leather portfolio. Inside were a stack of papers that looked official, but were actually legally worthless. It was a transfer of deed for a property that had already been foreclosed on. If he signed it, he was committing fraud on top of fraud. I understand, my mother said. Her voice was steady. The rage had crystallized into something cold and hard. Good, I said. Let us go. The ride to Tribeca was silent. We took my mother's car, not a limo, to maintain the illusion of humility. I drove. When we pulled up to the vault, the valet recognized me, but a subtle shake of my head told him to treat me like a stranger. We were ushered into the private wine cellar. It was a dimly lit room lined with thousands of bottles of vintage wine. In the center was a mahogany table set for 4. The air was cool and smelled of cork and oak. Hidden in the floral arrangement of white roses was a high-fidelity microphone. Behind the one-way mirror on the far wall, Captain Henderson and his team were watching. We sat down. My mother's hands were shaking this time for real. He is late, Ebony whispered, checking the time. It was 7:15. He is making us wait, I said. It is a power move. Just sit tight. At 7:20, the heavy oak door opened. Kyle walked in. He had changed out of his wedding suit into jeans and a cashmere sweater, trying to look casual, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the exits, assessing the value of the wine on the walls. He looked at us with a sneer of triumph. Well, he said, sliding into the chair at the head of the table. Look at this. The 3 witches. Hello, Julian, my mother said, her voice cracking perfectly. Thank you for coming. Kyle laughed. He reached for the bottle of wine on the table, a Chateau Margaux worth $2,000, that I had selected specifically because I knew he wouldn't know the difference between it and table wine. He poured himself a glass without offering us any. I am only here because Zora said you were ready to stop playing games, he said, taking a sip. So, where is it? My mother pushed the leather portfolio across the table. It is all there, she said. The deed, the transfer papers. I signed everything. You just need to countersign. Kyle opened the folder. He scanned the documents. I watched his eyes. He wasn't reading the legal text. He was looking for the address. He was looking for the confirmation of value, and the cash he asked, looking up. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. It contained $10,000 in cash, my own money bait for the trap. It is all we could get on short notice, I said quietly. The rest is coming tomorrow. Kyle snatched the envelope. He counted it quickly, his greedy fingers flipping through the bills. It is light, he grumbled, but it will do for now. He picked up the gold pen that was lying on the table. He looked at Ebony. You know, babe, he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. You really messed up today. I was ready to give you the world, but you had to go and act like a savage. I am sorry, Ebony whispered, looking down at her hands. I was emotional. You were crazy, he corrected her. But I am a forgiving man. If this house clears, maybe I will call you from Europe. Maybe we can try again. He was lying. We all knew he was lying. He was going to sign the papers, take the cash, and disappear. Just sign it, Julian, I said, keeping my voice deferential. So we can all move on. He uncapped the pen. He looked at the document. This is it, he muttered. The big payday. Wait, I said. He looked up annoyed. What now? I just want to clarify one thing I said. For the record, you admit that you never intended to marry her. You admit that the wedding was just a way to pressure my mother into signing this house over to you. Kyle laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that echoed off the wine bottles. Marry her, he scoffed. Look at her. Look at you people. You really thought a guy like me would marry into this family. I was doing you a favor. I was giving you a dream. The wedding was just the closing cost of the deal. Of course I wasn't going to marry her. I have a wife in Ohio. The room went deadly still. A wife in Ohio. That was a new detail. That was bigamy. So this is just business, I said. It is always business, Zora, he said. He looked at me with genuine pity. You are the only one smart enough to see it. Too bad you are on the losing side. He pressed the pen to the paper. He signed his name, Julian Sterling. Then just to be sure, I pushed. You should sign your real name too, I said, for the bank. They know about Kyle Miller. He froze. He looked at me. The arrogance vanished, replaced by sudden, sharp fear. How do you know that name? He whispered. Because I said, dropping the act and leaning forward, my voice returning to its natural icy command. I am the bank. I looked at the mirror on the wall. Now, I said. The wall of the wine cellar did not just open, it shattered. The door burst inward as 6 officers in tactical gear swarmed the room. Captain Henderson was in the lead, his weapon drawn. Kyle Miller, put your hands on the table, police shouted. Kyle scrambled back, knocking his chair over. He looked at the door, then at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The envelope of cash, the private room, the deed. It was all a stage. You set me up, he screamed. You bitch! You set me up! I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in my skirt. I picked up the glass of wine he had poured but barely touched. I didn't just set you up, Kyle, I said, as the officers slammed him face first onto the mahogany table. I foreclosed on you. My mother and Ebony watched in stunned silence as the man who had terrorized them was handcuffed, read his rights, and dragged out of the room. He was screaming obscenities the whole way. When the door closed, leaving us alone with the silence and the expensive wine, I looked at my mother. She was trembling, but not from fear. From relief. Is it over? She asked. I picked up the fake deed he had signed. I ripped it in half just like I had ripped the check. For him it is over, I said. He just confessed to fraud, extortion, and bigamy on a federal wiretap. He is going away for 20 years. I turned to leave. But for us, I added, looking at the 2 women who had made me feel small for my entire life, the reckoning is just beginning. Let us go home. We have to discuss the rent. The air in the private wine cellar of the vault was kept at a precise 55 degrees to preserve the vintage bottles lining the mahogany shelves from floor to ceiling. It was cold enough to warrant a jacket, but my mother Patricia was shivering from something far deeper than the ambient temperature. She sat across from me, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. Next to her, Ebony stared at the empty crystal glass in front of her, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. We were waiting. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. It was now 7:45. Every minute that ticked by on the antique grandfather clock in the corner was a calculated insult. Julian knew we were here. He knew we were desperate. Making us wait was his way of asserting dominance before he even walked into the room. He was letting us marinate in our own anxiety, ensuring that by the time he arrived, we would be grateful for the scraps of his attention. I sat with my back to the wall of wine, perfectly positioned to see the heavy oak door. I was the only one not shivering. The adrenaline in my veins had turned to ice. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse, feeling the weight of the hidden microphone taped to the underside of the table arrangement. In the van parked in the alleyway behind the restaurant, Captain Henderson and his team were listening to the silence. They were waiting for the performance to begin. "He is not coming," Patricia whispered, her voice thin and brittle. "He changed his mind. He knows we do not have the money yet. We should have brought more cash, Zora. 10,000 is not enough for a man like him." "He is coming," I said without looking at her. My eyes remained fixed on the door. "Men like Julian do not walk away from a payday. He is just making sure we know who is in charge. Drink your water, Mom. You look dehydrated." She reached for the glass, her hand shaking so badly the water sloshed over the rim. She set it back down without drinking. "I cannot do this," she said. "I cannot look him in the eye after what he did. The way he looked at me at the wedding. The things he said." "You do not have to look him in the eye," I said, my voice low and steady. "You just have to look at the paperwork. You have to remember the script. You are the repentant mother. You are the fool who made a mistake. You are begging for his forgiveness because you believe he is the only salvation for this family. Can you be that person for one more hour?" Patricia looked at me. For a moment, I saw a flash of the imperious woman who used to critique my posture at the dinner table, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a hollow defeat. "I have been that person my whole life," she murmured. "I just never realized it until today." The heavy latch of the door clicked. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Showtime, I thought. The door swung open and Julian Sterling walked in. Or rather, Kyle Miller walked in, wearing the skin of Julian Sterling. He had abandoned the tuxedo from the wedding disaster. Instead, he was wearing dark designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to sleep in. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man meeting friends for a drink, not a man who had just committed a hate crime and abandoned his bride at the altar. He paused in the doorway, letting his gaze sweep over the room. He looked at the walls of expensive wine, assessing their value. He looked at Ebony, whose head was bowed in shame. He looked at my mother, who was visibly trembling. Finally, his eyes landed on me. He smirked. It was a small, tight expression of victory. He strolled to the head of the table, the seat that commanded the room, and pulled out the chair with a leisurely grace. He sat down, leaning back and spreading his legs as if he were sitting on a throne. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of any guilt. "I have to say I am surprised. I thought you people would have more pride. After the things I said today, I expected a lawsuit. Maybe a hitman. But here you are, sitting in the dark waiting for me." He reached for the bottle of wine I had ordered, a $2,000 vintage, and poured himself a glass without asking if anyone else wanted some. He swirled the red liquid, watching the legs drip down the glass. "It is pathetic, really," he continued, taking a sip. "But I guess desperation does strange things to people." "Right, Patricia." My mother flinched at the sound of her name. She looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She looked exactly the way I needed her to look. Broken. "Hello, Julian," she whispered. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate you hearing us out." Kyle laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. "Hearing you out. Is that what we are doing? I thought we were concluding a business transaction. Zora told me you were ready to stop playing games. She told me you finally realized your place." He looked at me, expecting me to cower. I held his gaze. My face was a mask of polite submission, but my eyes were flat. "We are ready, Julian," I said, my voice soft. "Mom understands the gravity of the situation. She knows she disrespected you. She wants to make it right." Kyle swirled his wine again, looking at my mother with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "She wants to make it right," he repeated mockingly. "You know, Patricia, it wasn't just the credit card. It was the audacity. You stood there in front of my friends, in front of my investors, and you made me look cheap. You made me look like I was associated with poverty. Do you have any idea how damaging that is to my brand?" "I am so sorry," Patricia stammered, wringing her hands. "I never meant to embarrass you. It was a banking error. I swear. The funds are there now." "Stop lying," Kyle snapped, slamming the wine glass down on the table. The sound echoed violently. "You do not have funds. You have debt. You have a mortgage you cannot pay, and a daughter who thinks she is a princess but acts like a ghetto brat." He gestured vaguely at Ebony, who flinched as if he had struck her. "I was doing you a favor," he hissed, leaning forward. "I was going to elevate you. I was going to wash the stain of mediocrity off this family. And you spat in my face with your incompetence." "You spat in my face," my mother whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the heavy powder on her cheek. "You spat on me, Julian. And you deserved it," he countered, cold as ice. "You needed a wake-up call. You needed to remember who holds the power here. You think because you live in a big white house and drive a Mercedes that you are one of us. You are not. You are guests in my world, and guests need to learn manners." The silence that followed was thick with humiliation. I could feel the rage radiating off my mother, but she pushed it down, burying it under layers of fear. She believed that this man and the imaginary money he controlled was the only thing keeping her from ruin. She did not know I had already bought her debt. She was operating on survival instinct. So Kyle said, leaning back again and crossing his arms, "Before we talk about the house, before I sign any papers to save your miserable skins, I think I am owed a proper apology." "I already apologized," my mother said, her voice trembling. "I said I was sorry." "Not like that," he said, shaking his head. "That was a social apology. That was polite. I want a real apology. I want you to show me you understand the hierarchy." He pointed a finger at the floor next to his chair. "On your knees, Patricia." The air left the room. Ebony gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. This was not part of the script. This was pure, unadulterated sadism. He wanted to break her completely. My mother stared at him. "Excuse me," she whispered. "You heard me." Kyle said, his face hardening. "You embarrassed me in public. You beg me for forgiveness in private. Get on your knees and ask me to save your family, or I walk out that door and tomorrow the bank takes your house and the press eats your daughter alive." He looked at his watch. "You have 10 seconds. My mother looked at Ebony. She looked at the closed door. She looked at me. In her eyes, I saw the complete collapse of her spirit. She saw no other way out. She gripped the edge of the table and began to push her chair back. "Mom, do not!" Ebony cried out, but her voice was weak. Patricia ignored her. She began to slide off the velvet chair. Her knees, which had been stiff with arthritis for years, bent slowly. She was actually going to do it. She was going to kneel on the cold stone floor of a wine cellar and beg a con artist for salvation. The sight of it made something snap inside me. I had spent years resenting my mother. I had spent years hating her for her weakness, for her cruelty to me, for her obsession with status. But she was still a Vance. She was still the woman who had carried me. And no white man from a trailer park was going to have the satisfaction of seeing her kneel. As her knees hovered inches from the floor, I moved. I did not stand up. I did not shout. Underneath the heavy tablecloth, I swung my leg. The toe of my designer stiletto connected hard with my mother's shin. It was a sharp, vicious kick. My mother gasped in pain and grabbed the table to steady herself, freezing her descent. She looked at me, shock replacing the despair in her eyes. I stared back at her. My face was composed, but my eyes were blazing with a command so fierce it could have cut glass. "Sit down." I did not speak the words, but I projected them with every ounce of my will. I narrowed my eyes slightly, a microscopic shake of my head that only she could see. It was a look that said, "If you touch that floor, I will destroy you myself." My mother hesitated. She looked at Julian, who was watching with a twisted grin, expecting total submission. Then she looked back at me. For the first time in 35 years, she saw the power I held. She realized that the daughter she had dismissed was the only alpha in the room. Slowly, painfully, she pulled herself back up. She sat back in the chair. She smoothed her skirt. She did not look at Julian. She looked at her hands. Kyle's grin faded. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I gave you an order, Patricia. She is not kneeling." "Julian," I said. My voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. It was not the voice of the submissive sister anymore. It was the voice I used to close million-dollar deals. It was calm, clear, and absolutely final. "Excuse me," Kyle said, turning his gaze to me. "I did not ask for your opinion, Zora. Keep your mouth shut or you can get out." "We are here to do business," I said, ignoring his threat. "You want the house. We want the marriage reinstated. Humiliating an old woman does not get you the deed. Signing the papers gets you the deed." I reached into my leather briefcase, which was resting by my feet. I pulled out a thick, heavy folder. It landed on the table with a solid thud that drew his eyes immediately. "You want to be paid?" I continued, keeping my hand on the folder. "Then stop playing games. The apology is in the paperwork. The respect is in the asset transfer. You want the house, Julian. It is right here." I slid the folder across the mahogany table. It stopped inches from his wine glass. Kyle looked at the folder. The greed in his eyes battled with his bruised ego. He wanted the power trip of seeing my mother kneel, but he wanted the $300,000 more. He was a grifter at heart, and grifters never leave money on the table. He looked at me with a sneer. "You are lucky I am a businessman, Zora. Because if I was just a man, I would leave you all here to rot." "But you are a businessman," I said, forcing a tight smile. "And business requires signatures." He reached out and placed his hand on the folder. He opened it. The top document was a deed transfer expertly forged by my team to look exactly like the original title to my parents' home. It had the bank stamps. It had the notary seals. To an untrained eye, it looked like a winning lottery ticket. He ran his finger down the page. I could see him doing the math in his head, selling the house, cashing out, disappearing to Mexico before the week was out. "Where is the pen?" he asked, not looking up. I reached into my purse and pulled out a gold Mont Blanc pen. I held it out, but I did not let go when he reached for it. "One condition," I said. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What?" "You sign everything I said. The deed, the transfer of liability, and the prenup amendment that gives you full control of Ebony's assets. If we are doing this, we are doing it all the way. I want you to have everything so there is no confusion later about who owns what." He laughed. He snatched the pen from my hand. "You really are desperate, aren't you? You are selling your own sister down the river just to keep up appearances." "I am just practical," I said quietly. "Sign the papers, Julian. Make it official." He clicked the pen. He looked at the document. He looked at the line that required his signature. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he thought he was stepping onto a podium. I watched the tip of the pen touch the paper. "Make sure you press hard," I said. "The copies need to be clear." I glanced at the mirror on the wall. I knew Captain Henderson was watching. I knew the cameras were recording the motion of his hand. Once that ink hit the paper, the crime was complete. Attempted grand larceny, fraud, extortion. Kyle began to sign. The scratching of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. The ink was barely dry on the paper when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was a subtle change at first, like the drop in pressure before a hurricane makes landfall. Kyle Miller sat back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face, believing he had just swindled $300,000 and a prime piece of real estate from a family he considered beneath him. He looked at the deed, then at me, his eyes dancing with the thrill of the con. "Pleasure doing business with you, Zora," he said, reaching for his wine glass again. "You know you are smarter than you look. Maybe if you lost 10 pounds and fixed that attitude, you could find a guy like me too." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. "I have already found a guy like you, Kyle," I said. my voice dropping the facade of the submissive sister and returning to the cold, hard steel of the prosecutor I was born to be. In fact, I found 3 of them. Kyle frowned, his hand pausing midair. What are you talking about? I pointed the remote at the large decorative mirror on the wall opposite him. It was a smart glass partition hiding a high-definition monitor that I had installed just hours before. I pressed the button. The mirror vanished, replaced by the glow of a 60-inch screen. The room was suddenly bathed in the blue light of a video conference call. The screen was split into 3 sections, each showing a woman sitting in her own living room, looking directly into the camera. Kyle's wine glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the table, shattering the stem and sending a dark red stain spreading across the fraudulent deed he had just signed. He did not seem to notice. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of color, until he looked like a corpse. "Hello, Kyle," the woman in the top left square said. Her name was Vanessa, a pediatrician from Atlanta. She looked tired but fierce. "Do you remember me? You told me you were an investment banker named Marcus. You took my retirement fund to invest in a startup that did not exist." The woman in the top right square spoke next. This was Sheila, a retired school principal from Chicago. "You told me your name was Trembling. You said you needed money for a kidney transplant. I sold my mother's jewelry for you." And the woman at the bottom, a younger executive from Houston named Renee, simply glared. "You left me at the altar too, Kyle. You told me my family was too loud. You told me I was lucky you even looked at me. And then you disappeared with the down payment for our house." Kyle stood up, his chair scraping violently against the stone floor. "Who are they?" he stammered, looking wildly between me and the screen. "What is this? Deep fakes. This is AI-generated nonsense. I do not know these people." I stood up slowly, leaning my hands on the table. The red wine was soaking into the papers, a perfect metaphor for the blood money he thought he had earned. "They know you, Kyle," I said. "And they have been waiting a long time to say hello." My mother and Ebony were staring at the screen, their mouths open in shock. They were seeing their own pain reflected in the faces of strangers. They were seeing the pattern, the charm, the isolation, the theft, the discard. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about Ebony not being good enough. It was a script he had run over and over again. "Stop it!" Kyle shouted, grabbing the remote from the table and trying to smash it. "Turn it off! You have no right to film me. This is entrapment." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, dark and satisfied. "Film you?" I asked. "Oh, Kyle, we are doing much more than filming you." I pulled out my tablet and tapped the screen, turning it around so he could see. "Say hello to your audience," I said. The tablet showed the interface of my company's official social media page. The red live badge was pulsing in the corner. The viewer count was ticking upward at a dizzying speed. 2.1 million viewers. The comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur of anger and shock. "We are currently live streaming to over 2 million people," I explained calmly. "My followers include federal prosecutors, investigative journalists, and half the population of the tri-state area. They just watched you sign a fraudulent deed. They just heard you admit to bigamy. And they just listened to these 3 brave women identify you as a serial predator." Kyle looked at the tablet. He saw the comments. "Lock him up. That is the guy who spit on that poor woman. He stole my aunt's pension too. Trash." His world was collapsing. The anonymity he relied on, the ability to slip from one city to another, changing names like changing shirts, was gone. His face was now burned into the digital retina of the world. He was viral, but not in the way a narcissist craves. He was the most hated man in America. You ruined me," he whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. "No," I said. "You ruined yourself when you decided my mother was a target. I just turned on the lights." Panic took over. The animal instinct to flee kicked in. Kyle shoved the table, sending it crashing into my mother and sister. Ebony screamed as the heavy mahogany pinned her legs. Kyle did not care. He scrambled over the fallen chairs, heading for the heavy oak door of the wine cellar. He thought he could make it to the alley. He thought he could disappear into the New York night. He reached the handle. He turned it. The door flew open, but not because he pulled it. It was kicked in from the outside. A wall of black tactical gear flooded into the small room. The shouting was deafening. FBI. Get on the ground, now. Police. Hands where I can see them. Kyle tried to backpedal, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped between the wall of wine and the wall of law enforcement. Captain Henderson was the first one through the door, his weapon drawn and leveled at Kyle's chest. "Kyle Miller, you are under arrest," Henderson shouted. I watched as Kyle raised his hands, shaking uncontrollably. The arrogance was gone. The swagger was gone. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a coward who preyed on women he thought were weak. Two officers grabbed him, spinning him around and slamming him against the wine rack. A bottle of Merlot dislodged and shattered on the floor, mixing with the spilled wine on the table. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. My mother and Ebony were clinging to each other in the corner, sobbing, but they were safe. The nightmare was ending. I walked over to where the officers were holding Kyle. He was pressed cheek first against the wooden shelf, breathing hard. I leaned in close so only he and the microphone could hear me. "Do you want to know the itemized bill for tonight?" I asked. He groaned, closing his eyes. I began to list the charges, ticking them off on my fingers. 1 count of identity fraud for posing as Julian Sterling. 1 count of wire fraud for every transfer you made across state lines. 1 count of grand larceny for the $300,000 you just tried to steal. 1 count of bigamy for marrying my sister while married to a woman in Ohio. I paused, leaning even closer. And my personal favorite. 1 count of hate crime enhancement. Because we have the video of you spitting on my mother and using racial slurs. In the state of New York, that upgrades your assault charge to a felony. You aren't going to a white-collar prison with tennis courts, Kyle. You are going to maximum security. I stood up and smoothed my blazer. Captain Henderson looked at me and nodded. "Good work, Zora. We have it from here." "Wait," Kyle screamed as they began to drag him out. "The deed." I signed the deed. "The house is mine." I picked up the wine-soaked document from the floor. I held it up so he could see it one last time. "This," I said. "This is a prop from a movie set. The real deed is in a safety deposit box that only I can access. You didn't sign a transfer, Kyle. You signed your confession." The officers hauled him out of the room. As he passed the threshold, the camera crew from the news van outside caught the shot of the century. The groom in handcuffs, screaming about a house that never belonged to him. I turned back to the room. The video call was still active. The 3 women on the screen were crying, but they were smiling through the tears. "We got him," Vanessa said. "Thank you, Zora." I nodded to them. "Thank you. You can rest now." I ended the call. The screen went black. The room was suddenly quiet, save for the sound of my mother and sister weeping. I looked at the mess, the shattered glass, the overturned chairs, the spilled wine that looked like blood. It was a disaster scene, but to me it looked like victory. I walked over to the table and pushed the heavy wood off my sister's legs. I reached out a hand to help her up. "Get up, Ebony," I said firmly. She looked at me, her mascara running, her dress ruined. She took my hand. Her grip was weak, but it was there. "Is he gone?" she whispered. "He is gone," I said. "And he is never coming back." I pulled her to her feet, then turned to my mother. She was still sitting in her chair, staring at the spot where Kyle had been standing. She looked shell-shocked. "Mom," I said. She looked up. "Zora," she said, her voice filled with awe and shame. You did all this." "I did," I said. "I cleaned up the mess, just like I always do." I picked up my purse. The live stream had ended, but my phone was vibrating with thousands of messages. My reputation as the toughest fixer in New York was not just intact, it was legendary. But there was one more piece of business to attend to: the fallout. Kyle was in jail, but the wounds he left behind were still fresh, and the biggest wound of all was the one inflicted on our bank account. "Let us go," I said. "We have a lot of work to do." "And Mom." "Yes, Sora. Next time you want to sell the house, call me first. I might give you a better price than a con artist." I walked out of the wine cellar, leaving them to follow. The air in the hallway was fresh and cool. I took a deep breath. I was tired. My bones ached, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I had faced the monster that terrified my family, and I had put him in a cage. Now I just had to figure out what to do with the people he left behind. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight is usually the end of the story, but for Kyle Miller, it was just the prelude to his final humiliation. Two federal agents had him gripped by the arms, dragging him toward the exit of the wine cellar. His cashmere sweater was torn at the shoulder, and his face was a mask of sweaty desperation. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had no exit. But true narcissists never go down quietly. They fight until the last breath of oxygen is squeezed from their lungs. Just as they reached the heavy oak door, Kyle dug his heels into the carpet. He twisted his body violently, forcing the agents to stop. He turned his head back toward the table where I stood gathering my documents. His eyes were wild, manic, and filled with a venomous spite that transcended his legal predicament. "You think you won, Zora?" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You think this is over? I signed the paper. The camera saw me sign the paper. Your mother signed the transfer. That is a binding legal contract." The agents tried to shove him forward, but he thrashed against them. "I own that house," he bellowed, spitting the words out. "I do not care if I go to jail. I will sue you from my cell. I have the deed. I have the rights. When I get out, I am going to evict your precious mother and sell that place for scrap. That house is mine." The room fell silent. My mother, Patricia, let out a small, terrified whimper. She looked at the spilled wine on the fraudulent contract and then at me. In her mind, Kyle was right. She had signed the paper. She believed she had just given away the only asset the family had left in a desperate attempt to save face. The fear in her eyes was absolute. She thought she was homeless. I held up a hand to Captain Henderson, signaling him to wait. I wanted Kyle to hear this. I wanted him to carry this knowledge with him into his 6x8 concrete cell. I walked slowly around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone floor. I stopped just inches from where Kyle was being held. I looked him up and down with the dispassionate gaze of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt portfolio. "You are right about one thing, Kyle," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily in the quiet room. "You did sign a paper. And my mother did sign a paper. In a normal world with normal assets, that would be a problem." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not white like the legal documents on the table. It was a thick cardstock, and it was bright blood red. It was a notice of seizure and redemption. "But you are missing a critical piece of information," I continued. "You see, you cannot transfer ownership of a property you do not own, and Patricia Vance does not own the house at 42 Willow Creek Drive." Kyle frowned, confusion warring with his rage. "What are you talking about? She lives there. Her name is on the mailbox. She lives there because I allow her to live there," I said. I unfolded the red paper and held it up. The text was large and clear. 2 years ago, my father quietly defaulted on the second mortgage he took out to pay for my sister's failed modeling career. He stopped paying the property taxes 6 months after that. He hid the notices. He threw away the warnings. He thought if he ignored it, the problem would go away. But banks do not go away, Kyle. You should know that. I took a step closer to him. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 24 months ago. The house was scheduled for a sheriff sale. My mother did not know. My sister did not know. My father was too ashamed to tell them. He was going to let them wake up one morning with a padlock on the front door. I looked over at my mother. She was staring at me, her hand covering her mouth, her complexion turning a sickly shade of gray. She was shaking her head in denial, but deep down she knew it was true. She knew the secrets that rotted the foundation of our family. I found out because I have alerts set up on all family assets, I said, turning back to Kyle. When the notice of default hit the public record, my system flagged it. I did not call them. I did not bail them out. I did what any smart investor would do. I called the bank. I tapped the red paper with my manicured fingernail. I bought the debt, Kyle. I bought the mortgage, the tax lien, and the title through a blind trust holding company. The deed was transferred to ZV Holdings, LLC, exactly 1 year and 11 months ago. I am the sole proprietor of ZV Holdings. The realization hit Kyle like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, and the agents had to hoist him up. You, he whispered. You own the house. I own every brick, I said, my voice hard as diamond. I own the roof. I own the driveway you parked your rented Maserati on. I own the bedroom my mother sleeps in. I own the water in the pipes and the electricity in the walls. For 2 years, I have paid every bill, every tax, and every repair cost. My parents are not homeowners. They are tenants at will, and they are living there on my charity. I leaned in close so my face was inches from his. So when you forced my mother to sign that transfer, you were forcing her to sign away property that belonged to me. That makes it null and void. That makes it a worthless piece of paper. You tried to steal a house from the woman you called a monkey, but you ended up trying to steal from the woman who just put you in handcuffs. Kyle stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The magnitude of his failure was total. He hadn't just lost the game he had been playing on a board that I owned. Take him away, I said to the agents, dismissing him like a servant. I am bored of looking at him. Kyle did not scream this time. He slumped forward, defeated, broken, and silent. The agents dragged him out the door, and the heavy oak slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the wine cellar. The silence that followed was heavy. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bomb that had detonated and sucked all the air out of the room. I turned slowly to face the table. My mother and Ebony were frozen. They looked like statues carved out of regret. My revelation had stripped them of their last defense. For years they had held on to their status, their home, and their perceived superiority over me. They treated me like an outsider, like a guest in their ancestral home. And all this time, they had been the guests. I had been the landlord. Patricia lowered her hand from her mouth. Her eyes were wide and hollow. She looked at the red paper still in my hand. You bought it, she whispered, her voice trembling so much it was barely audible. You bought the house. I did, I said, walking back to the table and placing the document down on top of the wine-stained tablecloth. It cost me $800,000 to clear the liens and the back taxes. I paid it in cash. But why didn't you tell us? Ebony asked. Her voice was small, childlike. Why did you let us think we still owned it? Because I knew this would happen, I said, gesturing to the mess around us. I knew Dad was incompetent with money. I knew Mom was obsessed with appearances. If I had told you I paid off the debt, you would have treated it like a lottery win. You would have taken out another loan against the equity. You would have spent it on vacations or clothes or weddings for con artists. I looked at my mother. Her face was a mask of shame. I kept it a secret to protect the asset, I said. And to protect you from yourselves. I let you play pretend because it was easier than dealing with your ego. But the game is over now. Patricia stood up slowly. She looked older than she ever had. She looked at the walls of the wine cellar, then at me. She seemed to be seeing me for the first time, not as her disappointment, but as the titan who held her life in her hands. We have been living in your house, she said softly, testing the words. When I told you to get out of my kitchen last Thanksgiving, it was your kitchen. Yes, I said. When I told you that you could not stay in the guest room because we needed space for storage, it was your room. Yes, I said. And when I told you not to come to the wedding because I was ashamed of you, I was standing on floorboards that you paid for. Yes, I said. Patricia sank back into her chair. She covered her face with her hands and began to weep. It wasn't the hysterical crying of the victim she had played earlier. It was the deep, gut-wrenching sobbing of a woman realizing that her entire reality was a lie. She realized that the daughter she had rejected was the only reason she had a pillow to lay her head on at night. Ebony looked at me. There was fear in her eyes. Real fear. "Are you going to kick us out?" she asked. "Like Kyle said, are you going to evict us?" I looked at my sister. She was wearing a dress I knew she couldn't afford. She was wearing makeup to impress a man who hated her. She was a product of my mother's vanity, useless in the real world. I picked up my purse and the red document. I slid the paper back into my pocket. I said. A ruthless business person would evict tenants who damage the property and disrespect the owner. And God knows you have done both. I paused, letting the threat hang in the air. But I am not Kyle, I said. I do not destroy families for sport. I walked toward the door, stopping just before I exited. However, the terms of your lease are changing, effective immediately. My mother looked up through her tears. What do you mean, she asked. I mean the charity ride is over, I said, my voice firm. Tomorrow I am sending a contractor to the house. He is going to change the locks. You will get a key only after you sign a standard rental agreement. You will pay rent. It will not be market rate because I am not a monster, but it will be enough to remind you every single month who keeps the lights on. I looked at Ebony. And you? I said, you are going to get a job. I do not care if it is retail. I do not care if it is waiting tables. You are going to contribute to the rent. If you are late, I will evict you. If you complain, I will evict you. And if you ever speak to me with disrespect in my own house again, I will change the locks while you are out and leave your belongings on the curb. I opened the door. The cool air of the corridor hit my face. Do we have an understanding? I asked. Patricia nodded. Her arrogance was gone, turned to dust. Yes, Zora. We understand. Good, I said. Now get up. The car is waiting. I am taking you home. To my house. I walked out into the night, leaving them to scramble after me. The payoff wasn't the money. The payoff wasn't even the arrest. The payoff was the silence that followed me, the absolute, unquestioned authority of a woman who had finally taken her rightful place at the head of the table. They had spent a lifetime trying to make me small. They had no idea I had bought the whole world they lived in. The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, taking the wreckage of my family's dignity and the man who had exploited it along with them. I stood on the sidewalk outside the vault, watching the convoy disappear around the corner of Tribeca. The paparazzi who had been tipped off by my team were having a field day. They captured every angle of Kyle Miller's disgrace, but more importantly, they captured me. I did not hide my face. I did not look down. I stood tall in the center of the storm, my silhouette framed by the flashbulbs, looking like the eye of a hurricane that had just leveled a city. By the time I climbed into the back of my town car, the narrative had already shifted. My phone screen was a blur of notifications. The headline on the New York Post website simply read, "The Queen of Cleanup." Twitter was calling me the ultimate protector. TikTok users were dissecting my outfit and my calm demeanor, praising the way I had dismantled a predator with nothing but a folder of paperwork and a glass of wine. But the most important notification came from the stock exchange. In the hour since the live stream began, shares of Vance Crisis Management had jumped 12%. The market loves a winner, and I had just proven on a global stage that there was no disaster I could not handle. I had turned a family tragedy into a masterclass in brand management. I should have felt elated. I should have been popping champagne. Instead, I felt a deep, profound exhaustion settling into my bones. The ride back to Westchester was quiet. My mother and sister sat across from me in the darkened cabin of the luxury SUV. They were small. That was the only word I could find to describe them. For my entire life, Patricia Vance had loomed large, a figure of judgment and impossible standards. Ebony had been the shining star, the center of gravity. Now stripped of their delusions and their financial security, they looked like ghosts haunting the backseat of my car. They did not speak to each other. They just watched me. I could feel their eyes on me, tracking my movements, waiting for me to dictate their reality. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. When we pulled into the driveway of the house at Willow Creek Drive, the moon was high and full, casting a pale light over the white colonial facade. It looked the same as it always had, the manicured lawn, the imposing pillars, the black shutters. But as I stepped out of the car and looked up at the structure, I felt a thrill of possession I had never allowed myself to feel before. It was not my parents' house. It was my house. I owned the bricks. I owned the memories. And tonight, I was bringing my tenants home. We walked inside. The house was cold. My mother immediately went into a performance of domesticity that was painful to watch. She rushed to the kitchen, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floors. "Let me make you some tea, Zora," she said, her voice high and breathless. "Or maybe some food. You must be starving. I have those crab cakes you used to like. I can heat them up in a second. It is no trouble. Really." I walked into the kitchen and leaned against the granite island. I watched her bustling around, opening cabinets, pulling out mugs, trying desperately to be useful. She was trying to rewrite the last 30 years in 30 seconds. She thought if she made me tea, if she played the role of the doting mother, I might forget that she had signed my property away to a con artist 3 hours ago. Ebony hovered in the doorway, hugging herself. "Zora," she said softly, "I just want to say, I know we have had our differences, but what you did tonight, you saved my life. I do not know what I would do without you. We are going to be so close now. I can feel it. We can start over, just the three of us girls, three of us." She smiled. It was a tentative, hopeful smile. It was the smile she used when she wanted to borrow money or clothes. She thought we were going back to normal. She thought I was the big sister who would clean up the mess, pat her on the head, and let her go back to playing princess. I looked at my mother, whose hands were shaking as she filled the kettle. I looked at my sister, who was already mentally planning her victim narrative for social media. "Stop," I said. The word was quiet, but it sucked the air out of the room. My mother froze with the kettle mid-air. Ebony's smile faltered. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the breakfast nook. "Both of you." They obeyed instantly. They sat at the small round table like school children sent to the principal's office. I reached into my briefcase. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a tissue to dry their tears. I pulled out 2 thick stapled documents. I walked over to the table and placed them down with a heavy thud. "What is this?" Patricia asked, looking at the legal text without touching it. "It is a lease agreement," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite them. "A lease?" Ebony repeated, confused. "Yes," I said, clasping my hands in front of me. "As I explained in the wine cellar, this house belongs to ZV Holdings. That is a legitimate business entity with shareholders and tax liabilities. I cannot have squatters living in a corporate asset. It is bad for the books." My mother looked hurt. "Squatters," she whispered. "Zora, we are your family." "You are my family," I agreed, "which is the only reason you are not currently standing on the curb with your suitcases. Any other tenant who mortgaged a property they did not own and invited a felon to live in it would be evicted immediately. I am giving you a grace period." I tapped the document in front of my mother. "This is a standard residential lease agreement. It grants you the right to occupy the master bedroom and the common areas. However, there are conditions." I flipped the page open to the section I had highlighted in yellow. Clause 4. Rent. You will pay $3,500 a month. That is 40% below market value for a house of this size in this school district. It is a gift, but it is a mandatory gift. My mother's face went pale. 3,500. "Zora, you know we do not have that kind of money. Your father's pension is barely enough for groceries and the utilities. The rest of our savings went to the wedding. Then you will have to make adjustments, I said coldly. Sell the Mercedes. You rarely drive it anyway. Cancel the country club membership. You only go there to gossip with women who talk about you behind your back. Sell the designer bags in your closet. You have $50,000 worth of leather sitting on shelves gathering dust. But that is our lifestyle, Patricia protested, tears welling up in her eyes. It is how we present ourselves to the world. The world knows you are broke, Mom, I said. The world watched you get spit on by a drifter because your credit card was declined. The illusion is over. You can either live simply in this beautiful house that I am graciously letting you stay in, or you can keep your lifestyle and go live in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. The choice is yours. Patricia slumped in her chair, defeated. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed the bottom line. She was signing away her fantasy, but she was keeping her roof. I turned to Ebony. She was staring at me, wide-eyed, looking like a deer in headlights. "And you?" I said, sliding the second document toward her. "I do not have any money, Zora," she said quickly, her voice rising in panic. "I cannot pay rent. You know I cannot. My brand deals have dried up, and after tonight, after the video of me throwing the cake, no one is going to want to work with me." "I know," I said. "That is why your lease is different." She looked down at the paper. It was not just a lease. Stapled to the back of it was a glossy brochure. "What is this?" she asked, picking it up. "It is an enrollment packet," I said. "For the Westchester Institute of Technology. Trade school." Ebony gasped, looking at me with horror. "You want me to go to trade school? I want you to have a skill that does not involve taking selfies or marrying rich men," I said. "I have already paid the tuition for the upcoming semester. You start in 2 weeks." "But what am I supposed to study?" she asked, dropping the brochure like it was contaminated. "I have enrolled you in the medical billing and coding program," I said. "It is a 2-year certification. It is steady, it is in demand, and it pays enough for you to eventually move out and support yourself." "Medical billing," Ebony screeched. "Zora, look at me. I am an influencer. I am a model. I cannot sit in a cubicle looking at spreadsheets all day. It is not me. The me you are talking about is unemployed, single, and living in her sister's house," I countered, my voice hard. "The influencer dream is dead, Ebony. Kyle killed it. And frankly, it was on life support before he showed up. You are 28 years old. You have no degree, you have no savings, you have no resume." I leaned forward. "Here is the deal. You live here rent-free for the next 2 years while you complete this program. You attend every class, you pass every exam, you get a part-time job to pay for your own food and phone bill. And if I say no," she challenged, trying to summon a shred of her old defiance. "Then you leave," I said simply. "Tonight." I pointed to the door. "You can walk out that door right now. You can go stay with one of your influencer friends. See how long they let you crash on their couch when you have nothing to offer them. See how far your beauty gets you in New York City with no money and a viral video of you acting like a lunatic attached to your name." Ebony looked at the door. She looked at the dark night outside. She knew the reality of the world. She knew that without the protective bubble of the family money, she was nothing. She looked back at the brochure. "Medical billing," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It is so boring." "It is dignified," I said. "And dignity is the one thing this family is desperately lacking right now." I uncapped the pen and held it out to her. "Sign it, Ebony, or start packing." She looked at our mother, hoping for an intervention. But Patricia was staring at the table, lost in her own reckoning. There was no rescue coming. The golden child had fallen, and the scapegoat was holding the pen. Ebony took the pen. She gripped it so hard her knuckles turned white. She signed the paper with a violent, scratchy signature. "Good," I said, collecting the documents and sliding them back into my briefcase. I stood up. The exhaustion was hitting me harder now, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the fatigue of a builder who had just laid the final stone of a fortress. I am going to bed, I announced. I have a board meeting at 9 a.m. I expect the kitchen to be clean by the time I come down for coffee. I walked out of the kitchen without looking back. I heard my mother start to sob softly. I heard Ebony pushing the brochure away, but I did not stop. I walked up the grand staircase, running my hand along the banister. For years I had walked up these stairs feeling like an intruder. Tonight I walked up them like the owner. I went to the master bedroom, the room that had always been forbidden territory, the sanctum of my parents' power. I opened the door. I did not go in to sleep. I just stood there looking at the space. I would let them stay in the room for now. I would let them keep their small comforts. But we all knew the truth. I closed the door and walked down the hall to my old room. It was small. It was painted a color I hated, but tonight it felt like a palace. I took off my blazer and hung it on the back of the chair. I looked out the window at the sprawling lawn below. I had established a new order. It was cold. It was transactional. But it was honest. And for the first time in the history of the Vance family, we were going to live in the real world. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. The silence in the house was absolute. It was the silence of submission. And it was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. 30 days is not a long time in the grand scheme of the universe, but in the household of the Vance family, it was an eternity. The ecosystem of our lives had been completely terraformed. The parasites had been forced to become hosts, and the host had finally built a fence. I parked my car a block away from the house on Willow Creek Drive. I did not park in the driveway anymore. I preferred the walk. It gave me a moment to observe my property from a distance, to inspect the lawn and the windows like the landlord I was. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The leaves were turning gold and red, a beautiful facade masking the brutal restructuring happening inside. Through the front bay window, I could see a figure moving in the kitchen. It was my mother, Patricia. In the old world, the world before the wedding disaster, she would have been sitting in the living room with a glass of Chardonnay watching reality television while our housekeeper Maria prepared dinner. But Maria was gone. I had terminated her contract the morning after the arrest, citing budget cuts. I walked closer, my heels silent on the pavement. I could see my mother clearly now. She was wearing an apron, not a cute decorative apron for hosting brunch, but a stained, functional apron. She was chopping vegetables. Her movements were slow and clumsy. She had not cooked a full meal in 20 years. I watched as she wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She looked tired. She looked older. But for the first time in her life, she looked like she was earning her keep. I learned later from the itemized receipt she left on the counter that she had gone grocery shopping at a discount chain that afternoon. She had driven her old sedan because the Mercedes was sold to pay off the immediate debts. She had pushed her own cart. She had bagged her own groceries. She had looked at price tags not as abstract numbers, but as hours of her life she had to budget for. It was a humiliating education, but a necessary one. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of onions and roasted chicken. It was a humble smell, a real smell. I hung my coat on the rack and walked into the kitchen. My mother jumped when she saw me. She dropped the knife clattering onto the cutting board. "Oh, Zora!" she gasped, hand to her chest. "You scared me. I did not hear you come in." "I was quiet," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "How was your day?" Patricia sighed, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her manicure was gone, replaced by short, practical nails. "It was fine. The market was crowded. And the price of poultry has gone up again. Did you know chicken breasts are $6 a pound?" I nodded. "I know. That is why I usually buy them in bulk." She looked at the stove where a pot was boiling. "I am making a stew," she said. "It is affordable, and it stretches for a few days." "That is smart thinking, Mom," I said. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old resentment. She wanted to snap at me. She wanted to complain that she was tired, that her feet hurt, that this was beneath her. But then she remembered the lease agreement stored in my safe. She remembered the rent payment due in 3 days. She swallowed her pride. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes," she said quietly. "If you want some." "I have plans," I said. "But thank you." The front door slammed open and heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Ebony trudged into the kitchen. She looked like a survivor of a natural disaster. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple black ensemble that was clearly a uniform. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy knot. She was carrying a stack of garment bags that looked heavier than she was. She dropped the bags on the floor and collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. She did not even look at us. She just stared at the ceiling. "I cannot do it," she moaned. "I literally cannot do it." "How was work?" I asked, my voice neutral. Ebony sat up, her eyes flashing with indignation. "It is slavery, Zora. Pure slavery. You said I would be an intern at a fashion house. You did not tell me I would be a glorified pack mule. I got you a position at a fashion PR firm," I corrected. "It is a very competitive role. Most girls would kill for it." "They made me steam clothes for 4 hours," Ebony cried, holding up her hands. "Look at my fingers. They are burned." And then my supervisor Sheila yelled at me because I got her latte with oat milk instead of almond milk. She called me incompetent in front of the whole office. "Welcome to the workforce," I said. "Sheila is your boss. If she wants almond milk, you get almond milk. But she is ugly." Ebony spat out the old vanity surfacing. "She wears polyester. Why do I have to listen to her?" "Because she signs your timesheet," I said. "And that timesheet determines if you have enough money to pay your share of the electric bill this month." Ebony groaned, putting her head on the table. "My feet are bleeding. I am wearing orthopedic shoes and they still hurt. I saw a girl I used to party with today. She came in for a fitting. She looked at me holding the steamer and asked if I was the new maid. I wanted to die. "But you didn't die," I said. "You finished your shift. You clocked out. And now you are home." That is what being an adult is, Ebony. It is doing things you hate so you can afford to live. She looked at me, tears stinging her eyes. "Does it ever get better?" I looked at my sister. The entitlement was slowly being ground out of her, not by my cruelty, but by the sheer weight of reality. She was learning that her face was not a currency that could pay rent. "It gets better when you get better at it," I said. "When you stop worrying about who sees you steaming the clothes and start worrying about doing a good job." I checked my watch. "I have to go." "You are leaving?" my mother asked, looking disappointed. "But you just got here." "I stopped by to pick up some files," I said, "and to check the condition of the house. The lawn looks a bit overgrown. You might want to mow it this weekend before the homeowners association sends a fine." "I will tell your father," Patricia murmured. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their stew and their sore feet. It was a grim scene, but it was an honest one. For the first time, they were contributing to their own survival. They were tired, they were humbled, but they were alive. And more importantly, they were no longer my burden. I drove back to the city, the skyline glittering ahead of me like a promise. My apartment in Manhattan was quiet and cool. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk. On the sleek surface sat a framed photograph of the Eiffel Tower. It was a stock photo I had bought at a tourist shop years ago, but it represented a dream I had deferred for too long. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the confirmation email from Air France. First class, one way. I had not just rebooked the trip I had abandoned, I had extended it. I was taking a month off. The firm could run itself. My team was trained. My reputation was bulletproof. I picked up the photo. Paris. I would finally sit at that cafe. I would finally drink that wine without checking my phone. I would walk along the Seine and breathe air that did not taste of obligation. My phone buzzed on the desk. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mother. "Zora, I saved a plate for you in the fridge. It is the stew, but I added those dumplings you used to like when you were little. I know you are busy, but maybe you can come by tomorrow night. Dad misses you. We all do." I stared at the message. A month ago, that text would have broken me. I would have read into it, desperate for the crumb of affection it offered. I would have cancelled my plans, driven back to Westchester, and eaten the dumplings while they made passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my job. I would have bought their love with my presence. But I read it now, and I saw it for what it was. It was a negotiation. It was a peace offering from a tenant to a landlord. It was fear dressed up as love. They missed me because I was the bank. They missed me because I was the shield. Maybe somewhere deep down there was a flicker of maternal instinct, but it was too entangled with survival to be trusted. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt free. I typed my reply. My fingers moved steady and sure. I am busy with meetings all week. I will not be able to make it. Please make sure the rent transfer for November is initiated by Friday. The bank charges a late fee, and I will not waive it again. I hit send. I watched the delivered status appear. I knew she was reading it. I knew she was sighing, sitting in the kitchen, feeling the sting of the boundary I had set. She would complain to my father. She would tell Ebony I was cold. But on Friday, the money would be in my account. I put the phone down and turned it off. I took a sip of wine. The freedom I felt wasn't warm and fuzzy. It wasn't the kind of freedom they write about in greeting cards where everyone hugs and learns a lesson. It was a cold, clear freedom. It was the freedom of knowing that I was the author of my own story. I looked out the window at the city lights. I had spent 35 years trying to find my place in their house. I realized now that the house was never the prize. The prize was the ability to walk out the door and build a castle of my own. My family was safe. They were housed. They were learning to be human. That was enough. I did not need them to love me. I needed them to respect me. And as I sat there in the silence of my victory, I realized that for the first time in the history of the Vance family, we finally had peace. I picked up the photo of Paris and placed it in my carry-on bag. Au revoir, I whispered to the empty room. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and walked into the bedroom. I slept soundly, dreamlessly, and without a single worry about the people I had left behind. They had their stew. I had the world. And that was a fair trade. True freedom begins the moment we stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding us. Zora's journey proves that being the black sheep is often a hidden blessing. It forces us to build our own empires. She didn't just survive her family's betrayal, she outgrew it by prioritizing her dignity and financial independence over their hollow approval. The most powerful revenge isn't cruelty. It is success protected by ironclad boundaries. If Zora's ultimate boss move resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with a toxic relative? Share your story in the comments below.